The courtroom in Jackson, Mississippi, pulsed with smug laughter as corrupt cops led by Officer Travis Boone clapped each other's backs. They'd framed Aisha Monroe, a black woman, for drugs, and the judge's gavel hovered, ready to lock her away. But Aisha rose unshaken, her smirk slicing through their cheers. "You forgot to check my badge," she said. Gasps erupted, eyes widened. This wasn't their win. It was the spark of their undoing. What war had she just ignited? Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe, because tomorrow's explosive episode is one you can't miss. The air hung heavy with humidity on a sweltering summer night in Jackson, Mississippi, the kind of heat that clung to your skin like a second layer and made every breath feel like a chore. Aisha Monroe, 35 years old with a quiet strength etched into her sharp features, walked briskly through the cracked sidewalks of the housing project she called home. Her shift at the community center had run late, the kids lingering with their questions about math and dreams, and now the sky was a deep indigo, stars swallowed by the city's haze. She adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag over her shoulder, her sneakers scuffing against the uneven pavement, her mind already drifting to the cool shower, waiting for her in her small apartment 3 blocks away. The streets were quiet, save for the distant hum of a TV through an open window, and the occasional bark of a stray dog. It was a night like any other, or so she thought. Then came the sirens. They sliced through the stillness, a jagged wail that grew louder, closer, until 2 police cruisers screeched around the corner, tires squealing against asphalt. Red and blue lights flashed across the peeling paint of the project buildings, casting eerie shadows that danced like specters. Aisha froze, her pulse quickening, not out of fear, but instinct, years of training kicking in beneath her calm exterior. Before she could process the scene, Officers Travis Boone and Marcus Hale leapt from the lead car, guns drawn, their faces twisted with a mix of arrogance and glee. Boone, a broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut and a permanent sneer, took the lead, his boots thudding as he closed the distance. Hale, leaner with a scar tracing his jaw, flanked him, his eyes glinting with something darker, something hungry. "Hands up now!" Boone barked, his voice a gravelly shout that echoed off the concrete walls. Aisha complied, raising her arms slowly, her bag still dangling from her shoulder. She kept her expression blank, her brown eyes locked on Boone's, reading every twitch of his mouth. "What's this about?" she asked, her tone steady, though she already knew the answer wouldn't matter. Boone didn't respond with words. Instead, he lunged forward, yanking her bag from her arm with a force that made her stumble. He ripped it open, rummaging through her wallet, keys, and a half-eaten granola bar, his thick fingers moving with purpose. Then, with a theatrical flourish, he pulled out a plastic bag filled with white powder, holding it up like a trophy. "Well, well, what do we have here?" he said, his grin widening, teeth flashing in the cruiser's headlights. Aisha's stomach tightened, but her face didn't betray her. She knew that bag wasn't hers, hadn't been there when she left the center. "That's not mine," she said, her voice firm, cutting through the humid air. Hale laughed, a sharp, barking sound, and stepped closer, his gun still trained on her chest. "Sure it ain't, sweetheart. You all say that." He spat the words, venom dripping from every syllable, and Aisha caught the glint of his badge, the shield that gave him power over her, over this moment. Neighbors began to peek out from behind curtains, their silhouettes framed in flickering light, some stepping onto porches with wide eyes and clenched fists. They knew her, knew she wasn't what these men claimed, but their fear kept them silent, a heavy weight pressing down on the night. Boone tossed the bag to Hale, who caught it with a smirk, then turned back to Aisha. "Dealing coke in our city? Big mistake, girl." The word girl landed like a slap, laced with a condescension that made her skin crawl. He grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back, and slammed her against the cruiser's hood. The metal was hot against her cheek, still radiating the day's heat, and she felt the sting as he snapped cuffs around her wrists, tightening them until the steel bit into her flesh. Pain shot up her arms, her fingers tingling as circulation faltered, but she didn't flinch. She wouldn't give them that. Hale circled around, leaning in close, his breath sour with tobacco. "Stay in your place next time," he hissed, low, enough that only she could hear, the threat sinking into her bones. They shoved her into the back seat, the door slamming shut with a clang that reverberated in her ears. The interior smelled of stale sweat and cheap coffee, a rancid mix that turned her stomach. Boone slid into the driver's seat, glancing at Hale in the passenger side as he started the engine. "I told you," Boone said, his grin stretching wider as he met his partner's eyes in the rearview mirror. "She walked right into it, didn't even see it coming." Hale chuckled, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm against the steering wheel, the sound grating against Aisha's nerves. "Text the guys," he said, pulling out his phone. "Let 'em know we got another one. Another big catch for the department." His thumbs moved quickly over the screen, the glow illuminating his scarred face, and Aisha caught the words "easy pickings" before he hit send. She sat stiffly, her wrists burning against the cuffs, her shoulders squared despite, the ache creeping into her muscles. Her heart pounded, a steady thump-thump that she forced into a controlled rhythm, refusing to let panic take hold. This wasn't her first time in cuffs, not by a long shot. But this was different. This wasn't a cover, wasn't a role she'd slipped into for a mission. This felt real, raw, the kind of real that gnawed at you. She curled her hands into fists, the movement small but deliberate, her nails digging into her palms. These men thought they had her, thought they'd snagged just another black woman who didn't belong, who could be tossed aside like garbage without a second glance. She'd seen this script play out too many times, on street corners, in courtrooms, in the lives of people she'd sworn to protect. They didn't know who she was, not yet, and that ignorance was her edge. The cruiser jolted forward, weaving through the narrow streets of the project, the flashing lights painting the world outside, in stark reds and blues. Aisha's eyes flicked to the window, catching glimpses of faces peering out, some with pity, others with resignation. She knew what they were thinking. Another one gone, another name swallowed by the system. The car slowed as it approached the precinct, a squat grey building that loomed like a fortress against the night sky. Its windows reflected the pulsing lights, giving it an almost alive quality, a beast waiting to devour her. Boone killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening, and yanked open her door with a rough tug. "All right, let's go, superstar," he said, his voice dripping with mockery as he grabbed her arm again, pulling her out onto the pavement. She didn't resist, didn't give him the satisfaction of a struggle. She stepped out, her head high, shoulders back, moving with a grace that belied the cuffs cutting into her skin. The precinct doors swung open, and a wave of noise hit her. Phones ringing, voices shouting, the clatter of keyboards like a chaotic symphony. The air inside was thick with the scent of old coffee, burnt plastic, and something deeper, something stale that clung to the walls, like the memory of every injustice that had passed through. Officers glanced up as Boone marched her past the desks, some raising eyebrows, others smirking, their eyes raking over her like she was a prize on display. A younger cop, barely out of training, leaned toward Boone as they passed, his voice low but audible. "This her?" he asked, shifting nervously on his feet. "Oh yeah," Boone replied, his tone smug as he shoved Aisha forward. "Busted her right in the middle of the project, bag full of powder, real shame." The younger officer hesitated, his lips parting as if to say something, then closing again, swallowing whatever doubt had flickered in his green eyes. Aisha caught it, that tiny crack in his certainty, and filed it away. Good. Not everyone was sold on Boone's story. Not yet. They didn't know the truth, but something about her presence, her stillness, gnawed at them. She kept her gaze forward, letting Boone lead her toward processing, his grip bruising her arm as he muttered about drinks waiting after this. The processing room was a blur of harsh fluorescent lights and cold metal. They shoved her against a counter, a tired-looking woman with glasses perched on her nose, barely glancing up as she reached for a clipboard. "Name," she droned, her voice flat. Boone smirked, leaning in close. "Aisha Monroe, drug possession, intent to distribute. You know, the usual." Aisha tilted her head slightly, watching him, noting the way he savored every word, the way he wanted the room to hear it, to cement her guilt before she could speak. The woman sighed, scribbling it down, and gestured for Aisha to step forward. The scanner beeped as it captured her fingerprints, locking her into their system, a digital cage snapping shut around her identity. Another officer strolled by, a burly man with a greying beard, and scoffed as he looked her over. "Damn shame. Looks like she had a future." Boone laughed, a harsh grating sound that bounced off the walls. "Yeah, well, not anymore." Aisha stayed silent, her lips pressed into a thin line, her mind racing even as her body remained still. They moved her through the routine, a mugshot with a flash that stung her eyes, paperwork shoved in her face, a pat-down that lingered too long, hands rough against her skin. Then came the cell, a concrete box that reeked of sweat and despair, the door clanging shut behind her with a finality that echoed in her chest. She leaned back against the wall, the metal cold against her fingertips, and exhaled slowly. This was just the beginning. They thought they'd won, thought they'd broken her, but they had no idea what was coming. Her eyes flicked upward, catching the faint outline of a security camera in the corner, one she'd installed months ago for a different case. A spark flared in her chest. They didn't know it was hers, and that was about to change everything. The Jackson police station was a grimy pit, its walls stained with years of neglect, the air thick with a sour mix of mildew and desperation. Aisha Monroe sat in a cell that felt more like a coffin, the concrete floor cold beneath her sneakers, the flickering bulb overhead casting jagged shadows across her face. Her wrists still ached from the cuffs, red welts forming where the steel had bitten deep, but her mind was sharp, slicing through the chaos around her. She could hear the hum of the precinct beyond the bars, the clatter of boots on tile, the drone of a radio spitting static, the low murmur of officers trading boasts like currency. Travis Boone's voice cut through it all, loud and brassy, bouncing off the corridor as he leaned against a desk just out of sight. "Told you she was easy," he said, his tone thick with triumph, a predator savoring his kill. Marcus Hale's laugh followed, sharp and jagged like glass breaking. "Another notch for the belt. Text the crew, let 'em know we're golden." Aisha's lips pressed into a thin line, her brown eyes narrowing as she tracked their words. She shifted slightly, feeling the weight of the hidden phone tucked inside her sock, a slim lifeline pressed against her ankle. Her fingers itched to move, but she waited, timing it perfectly as a rookie cop shuffled past her cell, his gaze darting away from hers like she was a ghost he didn't want to acknowledge. The second his footsteps faded, she slipped her hand. Down, swift and silent, pulling the device free. It was a burner, untraceable, one she'd stashed for emergencies like this, its screen glowing faintly as she powered it on. Her thumbs flew across the keys, typing a quick message to an old contact, a shadow from her real life. "They took the bait. Get ready." She hit send, then flipped to the app she'd rigged months ago, the one tied to that security camera. Perched above the project street, the footage loaded in seconds, grainy but clear. Boone and Hale screeching up in their cruiser, guns out, her standing there, calm as they stormed toward her. She watched Boone yank her bag, saw the moment he slipped that plastic sack of powder inside, his smirk caught in perfect profile. Hale's slurs rang out, tinny through the phone's speaker. "Stay in your place, girl." Each word a nail in their coffin. Aisha's pulse quickened, not from fear but anticipation, a hunter sighting prey. She clipped the video, 10 damning seconds, and sent it to a local reporter she'd vetted years back. A woman named Carla Tate, who lived for stories like this. The message was simple: expose them, now. She tucked the phone back into her sock, her movement smooth, undetectable, and leaned against the wall, exhaling slow and steady. The game was on. Hours crawled by, the cell's damp chill seeping into her bones, but Aisha didn't waver. She listened as the precinct's rhythm shifted, the casual chatter giving way to a rising buzz. Phones started ringing off the hook, a frantic staccato that made her lips twitch upward. She heard Boone's voice again, sharper now, edged with irritation. "What the hell's going on out there?" he snapped, his boots stomping closer. Hale muttered something about damn reporters, and then a third voice, the rookie from earlier, piped up, timid but audible. "Sir, you gotta see this. It's all over the news." Aisha tilted her head, catching the faint sound of a TV, flicking on the volume cranked high. Carla's voice poured through, crisp and unrelenting. Tonight, exclusive footage reveals Jackson police planting evidence on an innocent black woman. Watch closely. This is your tax dollars at work. The cell block fell silent, a vacuum of shock sucking the air dry. Aisha closed her eyes, picturing the clip looping on every screen in the city. Boone's meaty hand stuffing the bag, Hale's sneer as he pinned her, the slurs spilling like poison. She heard a crash, metal against metal, and Boone's roar split the stillness. Who the hell leaked this? His fist must have hit something, a chair, a wall, because the sound echoed, raw and furious. Hale cursed, his voice rising in pitch. It's gotta be her. How'd she do it? Footsteps pounded toward her cell, and Aisha opened her eyes just as Boone's hulking frame filled the doorway. His face a mask of rage, veins bulging in his neck. You think you're smart, huh? He snarled, gripping the bars so tight his knuckles whitened. You think this changes anything? Aisha met his glare unflinching, her voice low and steady. It changes everything. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, just let the words hang there, heavy with promise. Boone's jaw clenched, his breath coming in short, angry bursts, but before he could spit a reply, the precinct erupted again. A sergeant bellowed from down the hall, "Boone, Hale, get in here now, Chief's on the line." Boone shot her one last venomous look, then stormed off, Hale trailing behind like a scolded dog. Aisha leaned back, her heart steady now, a quiet triumph settling in her chest. She'd cracked their armor, exposed their rot to the world. But she knew this wasn't the end, not even close. By morning, the video had spread like wildfire, racking up millions of views, hashtags trending across every platform. Protests flared outside the precinct, a sea of fists and signs demanding justice, their chants rattling the windows. No more lies, no more frames. Inside, the pressure cooked. Aisha sat still as ever, listening to the chaos unfold when the cell door clanked open. A harried officer, not Boone or Hale, motioned her out, his face pale, avoiding her eyes. "You're free to go," he muttered, shoving release papers into her hands. She stood, rolling her shoulders, the ache from the cuffs a dull throb she ignored. The precinct was a madhouse as she walked out, phones screaming, officers scrambling, the TV still. Blaring Carla's report, she stepped into the dawn light, the crowd parting for her, some cheering, others snapping photos. A kid no older than 10 ran up, eyes wide. "You beat him!" he yelled, and Aisha gave him a nod, a flicker of warmth breaking through her. Steel. But as she reached the street's edge, she caught sight of Boone across the lot, leaning against his cruiser, his arms crossed, his stare locked on her. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her with a predator's patience. Then he turned, slamming his fist into the car's hood, the dent blooming under his knuckles like a promise. Aisha's gut twisted, not fear, but recognition. He wasn't done, not by a long shot. She'd won this round, humiliated him in front of the city, but Boone wasn't the type to slink away. He'd come back harder, meaner, and she'd be ready. For now she turned toward home, or what was left of it, her mind already spinning the next move. This fight was personal now, and Aisha knew the cost of poking a beast like Boone. What do you think? Should she have stayed quiet and let them win? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think she's right to fight back, and smash that like button if you're rooting for her to take these corrupt cops down. Don't forget to subscribe. Her next move's coming, and it's gonna flip everything you expect. Was Boone's rage just noise, or is he already plotting something worse? Stick around to find out. What's he got up his sleeve? The sun was barely up, painting the Jackson skyline in hues of orange and pink, when Aisha Monroe stepped into her modest apartment, the weight of the night still clinging to her like damp cloth. The place was small, a one-bedroom haven tucked in the heart of the housing project, its walls adorned with faded photos of her sister Nia's school plays and a single potted plant that somehow survived her erratic schedule. She dropped her keys on the chipped kitchen counter, the clink echoing in the quiet, and let out a slow breath, her shoulders slumping for the first time in hours. The viral video, the release, the crowd's cheers, it felt like a win, a crack in the armor of men like Travis Boone and Marcus Hale. She kicked off her sneakers, the ache in her wrists pulsing faintly, and headed for the fridge, craving something, cold to wash away the precinct's stench. Nia burst through the door moments later, her 16-year-old energy a whirlwind of braids and bright eyes. "Aisha, you're everywhere!" she exclaimed, waving her phone, the screen glowing with news alerts. "They're calling you a hero." Aisha managed a tired smile, pulling her sister into a quick hug, the warmth of Nia's arms grounding her. "Just did what I had to," she said, her voice soft but firm, brushing off the praise. Nia plopped onto the sagging couch, scrolling through comments, some supportive, others venomous, slurs popping up like weeds. "These jerks don't scare you, right?" Nia asked, glancing up, her brow furrowing. Aisha shook her head, grabbing 2 sodas and joining her. "Not a chance," she lied, popping the tab with a hiss, the fizz a small comfort in her hand. They sat there, the TV flickering with muted reruns, the room filling with the easy chatter of sisters catching up. Nia rambled about school, a math test she'd aced, a boy who'd asked her to the dance. Aisha listened, nodding, letting the normalcy seep in, a rare pause in the storm she'd kicked up. The clock ticked past 7, the morning light spilling through the thin curtains, and for a moment she let herself believe she'd turned the tide. Boone and Hale were humiliated. The city was watching. Maybe, just maybe, she'd rattled them enough to back off. She leaned back, sipping her soda, the cold aluminum soothing against her palm, and closed her eyes, savoring the quiet. Then came the crash. A shattering jolt ripped through the apartment, glass exploding inward as a Molotov cocktail sailed through the window, its fiery tail streaking across the room. Flames erupted on impact, licking up the curtains, the couch, the walls, a roaring beast swallowing everything in seconds. Aisha's eyes snapped open, her body moving before her mind caught up, yanking Nia off the couch as the girl screamed, her voice piercing the crackle of fire. "Get to the door!" Aisha shouted, shoving Nia ahead, her own lungs burning as smoke clawed its way in. The heat was suffocating, a wall of orange and black closing fast, and she stumbled over the coffee table, her shins slamming into wood, pain flaring, but ignored. Outside, the nightmarish scene unfolded. Aisha burst through the door, Nia coughing, beside her, and saw them, 5 figures in dark hoodies, Boone's off-duty buddies circling the building like wolves. Their voices rose over the blaze, a chilling chorus of slurs. "Burn, you filthy rat! And this is what you get." Neighbors spilled onto porches, some yelling, others frozen, phones trembling in their hands as they recorded. Aisha's heart pounded, her gaze darting, searching for an escape. But the men blocked the street, their silhouettes backlit by the inferno consuming her home. She grabbed Nia's hand, pulling her toward an alley, her sneakers slipping on dew-slick grass, the heat searing her back as they ran. They ducked behind a dumpster, the metal cold against her skin, and Aisha peered out, her breath ragged. The flames roared higher, devouring photos, clothes, memories, everything she'd built. Nia sobbed, clutching her arm, and Aisha whispered, we're okay," though the lie tasted bitter. Sirens wailed in the distance, too slow, too late, and when the police finally rolled up, it wasn't Boone or Hale, just 2 bored uniforms who stepped out, hands on hips, surveying the chaos with shrugs. "Looks like random vandalism," one said, his voice flat, kicking a shard of glass aside. The other scribbled something on a notepad, not even glancing at Aisha as she emerged, soot-streaked and furious. "Random," she snapped, stepping forward, her voice cutting through the smoke. "They threw a bomb through my window." The cop, a lanky guy with a patchy beard, barely looked up. "No witnesses, no proof," he said, his tone dripping with disinterest, a practiced dismissal she'd heard too often. Nia pointed at the crowd, some still filming. "They saw it, check the videos." The second cop, older with a gut spilling over his belt, snorted, "Kids these days always making stuff up." Aisha's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms, the sting grounding her rage. She knew this script, black woman torched home, no justice. The system didn't care, not unless she made it. The attackers had melted into the night, their laughter fading, but Aisha's eyes caught a figure across the street, half hidden by a flickering street lamp. Travis Boone stood there, arms crossed, his grin a slash of white in the dark. He didn't move, didn't need to. His presence was the message. "She'll learn," he muttered to himself, his voice low, carried on the wind, just enough for her to catch it. Her blood ran cold, not from fear but fury, a fire hotter than the one behind her. He'd sent his dogs to burn her out, to punish her for that video, for daring to fight back. The cops finished their half-hearted notes, climbed into their cruiser, and peeled off, leaving her standing in the wreckage, Nia shivering beside her. Aisha turned to the crowd, some still lingering, their faces a mix of pity and helplessness. "Anyone see where they went?" she called, her voice hoarse but steady. A few shook their heads, others shuffled away, fear sealing their lips. She scanned the smouldering ruin of her apartment, the flames dying down to embers, the skeleton of her life laid bare. Everything was gone, Nia's schoolbooks, her work files, the plants she'd nursed through winters. She pulled Nia close, the girl's tears soaking her shirt, and whispered, "We'll get through this." But her mind was elsewhere, replaying Boone's grin, his whispered threat. This wasn't just retaliation, it was a declaration of war. She led Nia away, her steps deliberate, her jaw tight. The crowd parted, some murmuring apologies, others snapping last photos of the destruction. Aisha didn't look back, didn't let the loss sink in. Not yet. She'd won a battle with that footage, humiliated Boone in front of millions, but this was his answer. A fire to erase her, to remind her of her place. Her hands shook, not from the cold, but from the storm brewing inside her. She'd thought, she'd turned the tide, thought the city's eyes would protect her, but Boone didn't care about optics. He cared about power, about breaking her, and he'd just raised the stakes. They reached a corner store, its neon sign buzzing faintly, and Aisha stopped, pulling Nia into the light. "You okay?" she asked, brushing soot from her sister's cheek. Nia nodded, her eyes red, her voice small. "They hate us, don't they?" Aisha didn't answer, couldn't, because the truth was too heavy to voice. Instead, she squeezed Nia's shoulder, her resolve hardening like steel. Boone thought he'd crushed her, thought this fire would silence her, but he'd miscalculated. She wasn't just a target, she was a fighter, and this was only the beginning. Her home was ashes, her victory a mirage, but her will was intact, sharper than ever. She glanced back one last time, Boone's silhouette gone, swallowed by the dawn, and knew he'd be watching, waiting. So would she. The safe house was a cramped one-room hideout in downtown Jackson, its peeling wallpaper and musty air a far cry from the home Aisha Monroe had lost to flames just hours ago. She sat on a rickety cot, her sister Nia curled up beside her, the girl's breathing uneven as she drifted into a fitful sleep. The glow of a single bulb cast harsh shadows across Aisha's face, her sharp features etched with exhaustion, but alive with purpose. Her wrists still bore the red marks of cuffs, her clothes smelled of smoke, and her shin throbbed from the coffee table she'd crashed into during their escape, but none of it mattered now. The fire had taken everything, photos, clothes, Nia's, schoolbooks, but it hadn't taken her fight. If anything, it had sharpened it, honed it into something lethal. She pulled her burner phone from her pocket, its screen cracked but functional, and checked the news. The video of Boone planting the drugs was still trending. The city's outrage a roaring tide she could almost hear through the thin walls. She opened a secure app, one only her FBI team knew, and typed a message to her handler, Jamal Carter, a man she'd trusted with her life for years. "Arson at my place, Boone's crew need intel on their burners." She hit send, her fingers steady despite the tremor of adrenaline coursing through her. Jamal's reply came fast. "On it. Stay low." Aisha nodded to herself, tucking the phone away, and leaned back against the wall, the plaster cool against her spine. She closed her eyes, replaying the night, the Molotov crashing through her window, the slurs echoing in the dark, Boone's grin under that street lamp. He'd wanted her broken, silenced, but he'd misjudged her. She wasn't just a victim, she was a weapon, and she was about to fire back. By noon, Jamal's intel landed, an encrypted file detailing burner phone logs tied to Boone's off-duty buddies. Aisha hunched over a borrowed laptop, its fan whirring, like a dying engine, and cross-referenced the numbers with call records from the night of the fire. Bingo! 3 calls pinged a tower 2 blocks from her apartment, timestamps matching the attack. She dug deeper, pulling audio snippets from a sting she'd run months back, voices she'd never forget. There they were, Boone's lackeys, their slurs captured mid-rant, gonna light her up good and teach that black trash a lesson. Her stomach churned, not from shock but fury, a white-hot blaze that matched the one they'd set. She compiled the evidence, phone logs, audio, timestamps, into a tight package and sent it to Carla Tate, the reporter who'd broken the first story. "Drop this now," she wrote. "Make it loud." Carla didn't disappoint. By evening, the audio hit the airwaves, a bombshell that shook Jackson to its core. Aisha watched it unfold on the safe house's tiny TV, the screen flickering as Carla's voice boomed. New evidence ties off-duty Jackson police to a vicious arson attack on Aisha Monroe's home. Listen to this. The slurs played, raw and unfiltered, followed by gasps from the studio crew. Protests erupted within hours, a tidal wave of bodies flooding the streets outside City Hall, their signs jagged with anger. Boone must go. And justice for Aisha. Aisha stood at the safe house window, peering through a slit in the blinds, her heart pounding with a mix of pride and dread. Nia stirred, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and joined her, staring at the chaos below. "They're fighting for you," she whispered, awe in her voice. Aisha squeezed her shoulder, a faint smile breaking through. "For us," she corrected. The pressure hit critical mass by nightfall. The mayor, a wiry man named Harold Vance with a penchant for dodging scandals, caved under the spotlight. Aisha flipped channels, catching his press conference live, his tie askew as he faced a swarm of mics. "Officers Travis Boone and Marcus Hale are suspended pending investigation," he stammered, sweat beading on his brow. "We take these allegations seriously." The crowd outside roared, a sound that rattled the safe house windows, and Aisha let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She turned to Nia, her smile widening. "We got him," she said, the words tasting like victory, sweet and hard-earned. Nia grinned back, throwing her arms around her, and for a moment the room felt lighter, the weight of the fire lifting just enough to breathe. Aisha stepped outside, needing air, and the crowd spotted her instantly. They parted, cheering, some reaching out to touch her arm, others snapping photos that lit up the night with flashes. An older woman, her hair grey and braided, pressed a fist to her chest and nodded, tears in her eyes. "You're our voice," she said, and Aisha nodded back, her throat tight. She climbed onto a bench, raising a hand to quiet them, her voice carrying over the din. "This isn't over," she said, firm but steady, "but it's a start." The cheers swelled again, a wave crashing against the city's rot, and she stepped down, her legs shaky but her resolve ironclad. She'd turned the tide, forced their hand. Boone and Hale were down, at least for now, but the victory was a mirage, fragile as glass. While Aisha slept that night, Boone sat in a dimly lit bar across town, his suspension papers crumpled in his fist, a whiskey glass sweating on the table. He wasn't shaken. He was furious, his mind a furnace of plans. He'd called in a favor, an old buddy on the bench, Judge Clarence Dutton, a man who owed him for burying a DUI years back. By morning, Dutton had ruled the audio inadmissible, citing some obscure chain of custody loophole, and slapped a gag order on Carla's station. Boone's suspension lifted before the ink dried, a backroom deal sealed with a handshake and a smirk. He strode back into the precinct at noon, his boots loud against the tile, his crew clapping him on the back like he'd won a war. Aisha woke to Nia, shaking her, the girl's face pale as she held up her phone. "They're back," she said, her voice trembling. Aisha grabbed the device, her eyes scanning the headline, "Officers reinstated after evidence tossed." The TV confirmed it, a news anchor droning about procedural errors. As Boone's face flashed on screen, his grin wider than ever. Aisha's stomach dropped, her hands curling into fists, nails biting her palms. She flipped to a live feed from the precinct, and there he was, Boone leaning against a desk laughing with Hale, his eyes glinting with a promise of more. The crowd outside City Hall thinned, their chants fading, replaced by a stunned silence that echoed in her chest. She stood, pacing the tiny room, her mind racing. She'd hit them hard, exposed their hate to millions, and they'd slithered out anyway, the system bending to shield them. Nia watched her, biting her lip. "What now?" she asked, her voice small. Aisha stopped, meeting her sister's gaze, her jaw tight. "We hit harder," she said, the words a vow. Boone thought he'd won, thought he'd scared her off, but he didn't know the half of what she could do. She'd tasted triumph, felt the city rise with her, and now it was gone, snatched by a corrupt judge and a rigged game. Her safe house walls closed in, the air thick with defeat, but her eyes burned with something fiercer. Resolve, unyielding and dangerous. What do you think? Can Aisha keep fighting when the system's this rotten? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you believe she's got the strength to take Boone down, and smash that like button if you're furious at how they let him walk. Subscribe now. Her next strike's coming, and it's going to shake this city to its bones. Will. Boone's next move break her, or is he underestimating the storm she's about to unleash? Keep watching. How far will this war go? The safe house in downtown Jackson felt like a cage after Boone's reinstatement, its peeling walls and stale air pressing in on Aisha Monroe as she paced, her sneakers scuffing the worn floorboards. Her burner phone buzzed relentlessly. News, alerts piling up like storm clouds, Boone and Hale back on duty, the city's outrage fizzling into resignation. She stopped, hands on her hips, her breath shallow, the sting of defeat bitter on her tongue. Nia, her 16-year-old sister, sat cross-legged on the cot, her phone dimmed, her eyes fixed on Aisha with a quiet worry that cut deeper than words. "We can't stay here forever," Nia said, her voice soft but steady, braids swinging as she shifted. Aisha nodded, running a hand over her face, the soot from the fire still faint on her skin. "I know," she replied, her mind already spinning a plan. She'd moved Nia to a new school that morning, a small private academy 10 miles across town, a place she'd vetted for safety, its brick walls and gated entrance a shield against Boone's reach, or so she thought. She'd dropped Nia off herself, watching her sister blend into the crowd of uniformed kids, her backpack slung over one shoulder, a faint smile breaking through the tension. "Be careful," Aisha had warned, her voice firm, and Nia had rolled, her eyes teasing, "You're worse than Mum was." The memory of their mother, gone 5 years now, stung, but Aisha had forced a grin, waving as Nia disappeared inside. She'd driven back to the safe house, her gut tight, knowing Boone wouldn't let her last strike slide. Aisha threw herself into work, her laptop humming as she tapped into FBI databases, chasing Boone's digital fingerprints. She'd been close, to cracking his network before the fire, encrypted emails, payoffs to lowlifes, a web of corruption she could almost touch. Her handler, Jamal, fed her scraps. A tip about Boone meeting a known fixer, a grainy photo of Hale with a burner phone. She pieced it together, her fingers flying over keys, the screen's glow reflecting in her sharp eyes. She was onto something big, a ledger of fake arrests, black names stacked like trophies, a pattern she could blow wide open. Her pulse quickened, a spark of hope flaring. If she could get this to the feds, Boone's suspension might stick. Maybe. Even land him in cuffs. She saved the file, her chest tight with anticipation, when her phone rang, shrill and insistent. It was Nia's school. Aisha answered, her heart lurching as the principal's voice crackled through, clipped and urgent. "Ms. Monroe, Nia's gone. She didn't make it to third period." The words hit like a fist, knocking the air from her lungs. "What do you mean, gone?" she demanded, standing so fast the chair tipped over, clattering against the floor. The principal stammered. "She was at recess then. We can't find her. We've called the police." Aisha's blood ran cold, her mind racing to Boone, his grin, his threat. She hung up, grabbing her keys, her body moving on autopilot as she bolted for the door, the safe house slamming shut behind her. The drive was a blur, her knuckles white. On the wheel, the city's humid haze blurring past. She reached the school in 15 minutes, tires screeching as she parked crookedly by the gate. Teachers milled outside, faces pale, kids whispering behind hands, but no Nia. Aisha stormed the principal's office, a squat room with faded posters and a desk piled with papers. "Where is she?" she snapped, her voice a blade. "And the principal?" A wiry woman with glasses flinched. "We don't know," she said, wringing her hands. "The cameras didn't catch anything." Aisha's eyes flicked to the window, the playground beyond, and spotted a delivery van idling across the street. Still too quiet. Her gut screamed and she ran outside, the heat slamming into her as she sprinted toward it. The van peeled away as she neared, tires shrieking, but not before she glimpsed a figure in the back, Nia, bound, her eyes wide with terror. Aisha shouted her name, lungs burning, but the vehicle vanished around a corner, swallowed by traffic. She doubled over, gasping, when her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. She opened it, and a photo loaded. Nia, gagged, a note pinned to her chest. "Drop it or she's gone." Below it, a sneering emoji, a slap of mockery. Aisha's vision blurred, rage and fear colliding, but she forced herself upright, her mind shifting to survival mode. Boone had her sister, and he'd crossed a line she'd never forgive. She raced back to the safe house, her hands trembling as she pulled up Jamal's number. "They've got Nia," she said, her voice cracking for the first time, and Jamal didn't hesitate. "Sending a team. We'll trace it." She dug into her gear, a hidden stash under the cot. Lockpicks, a tracker, a Glock she hadn't touched in months. The tracker was key. She'd sewn one into Nia's backpack weeks ago, a precaution she'd hoped never to need. She synced it to her laptop. The signal pinging a warehouse 20 miles north, a derelict shell on the city's edge. She grabbed her gun, the weight steadying her, and hit the road, the engine roaring as she pushed 90, the world a streak outside her windows. The warehouse loomed in the dusk, its rusted walls sagging under years of neglect, windows shattered like broken teeth. Aisha parked a block away, cutting the lights, and crept closer, her sneakers silent on gravel. She heard voices, rough, laughing, Boone's crew, and spotted 2 goons outside, masked, rifles slung over shoulders. Her tracker blinked steady. Nia was inside. Aisha circled, finding a side door, its lock rusted but intact. She picked it in seconds, the click barely audible, and slipped in, the air thick with dust and oil. Nia sat in the center, tied to a chair, her face bruised but defiant, eyes locking on Aisha with a flicker of relief. Aisha moved fast, cutting her free, whispering, "Stay quiet," as Nia nodded, stifling a sob. They slipped out the back, dodging a third goon who'd stepped away to smoke, his curses fading as they hit the car. Aisha floored it, Nia clutching her arm, the warehouse shrinking in the rear view. "They said it was Boone," Nia whispered, her voice raw. "Said you'd pay." Aisha's jaw tightened, her grip on the wheel iron. She'd saved Nia, outsmarted them, and for a fleeting moment she thought she'd won, thought she'd turned their cruelty back on them. They reached a new hideout, a friend's basement across town, and Aisha exhaled, hugging Nia tight, the girl's heartbeat a lifeline against her chest. She'd beaten Boone's dogs, kept her sister alive. It felt like a victory, a crack in his armor she could widen, but Boone wasn't done. While Aisha patched Nia's cuts, he sat in a precinct break room, sipping coffee, his phone buzzing with a tip from a mole. He'd lost Nia, but he had another play. He dialed a contact at Child Services, a woman he'd blackmailed years back over an affair. "Got a case for you," he said, his voice smooth, lethal. "Aisha Monroe, unfit sister, endangering a minor. Take the kid." By dawn, CPS stormed the basement, their knock a thunderclap that jolted Aisha awake. She opened the door, bleary-eyed, and froze as a stern woman in a grey suit pushed past, badge flashing. "We're taking Nia into custody," she said, her tone clipped, as 2 cops, Boone's allies, loomed behind her, smirking. Aisha lunged, blocking their path, her voice rising. "On what grounds?" The woman thrust papers at her, a fabricated report citing the fire, the kidnapping risk, lies spun from thin air. Nia screamed, "Aisha!" as they grabbed her, dragging her toward a van, her braids whipping as she fought. Aisha shoved forward, but a cop slammed her against the wall, his elbow digging into her ribs, breath hot with a slur. "Back off, trash!" She stumbled, helpless, as Nia's cries faded, the van's doors slamming shut. Boone stepped from the shadows across the street, laughing, a guttural sound that echoed in her skull. Her victory was dust. Nia was gone, ripped away by a system he'd twisted to his will, and Aisha stood alone, her fists bloody from pounding the wall, her resolve fracturing but not broken. The basement hideout in Jackson was a tomb of shadows, its concrete walls cold and damp, as Aisha Monroe stood frozen, her fists bruised from pounding the door where Nia had been dragged away by CPS just hours ago. The air smelled of mold and despair. The silence deafening after her sister's screams faded into the dawn. Aisha's chest heaved, her breath ragged, the sting of Boone's laughter still ringing in her ears. She'd saved Nia from that warehouse, outsmarted his goons, only for him to rip her sister away with a phone call and a rigged system. Her hands shook, not from exhaustion, but rage, a fire that burned hotter with every second she replayed the scene. The CPS woman's smug face, the cop's smirks, Boone's guttural chuckle from the shadows. She sank onto a folding chair, the metal creaking under her weight, and pressed her palms to her eyes, forcing the chaos into focus. She wasn't done. Not even close. Her burner phone buzzed, a lifeline in the dark, and she snatched it up. Jamal's voice crackled through, low and urgent. Got a lead on Boone's crew. Newsroom contact says he'll meet you. Name's Malik Reed. Be careful. Aisha nodded to herself, pocketing the phone, her mind shifting gears. She needed an ally, someone with reach, and a journalist could amplify her fight. She grabbed her jacket, the fabric stiff with dried sweat, and slipped out, the morning sun harsh against her skin as she navigated Jackson's bustling streets. The newsroom was 10 blocks away, a squat building with grimy windows and a neon sign flickering WJXN. She pushed through the glass doors, the hum of printers and ringing phones hitting her like a wave, the air thick with coffee and ink. Malik Reed met her in a cluttered office, a lean man in his 30s with a shaved head and a notepad tucked under his arm. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp, scanning her like he was sizing up a story. Heard what happened, he said, his voice smooth, confident. Boone's a monster. I'm in. Let's take him down. Aisha studied him, noting the way. He leaned in, eager, almost too eager, but she brushed it off. She needed this. Good, she replied, her tone clipped. I've got evidence. Financials tying Boone to a supremacist group. Can you air it? Malik grinned, pulling out his phone. Give me what you've got. We'll go live tonight. Relief flickered in her chest, a rare spark. She might get Nia back with this. They worked fast. Aisha hunched over a desk as Malik typed, her laptop open beside his. She handed him the ledger she'd cracked, dates, payments, names linking Boone to a local hate outfit called the White Dawn, a group she'd been tracking for months. Cash flowed from Boone's accounts to theirs, funding fake arrests, Blackie. Lives snuffed out for quotas. Malik whistled, low and impressed. This is gold, he said, his fingers flying over keys. Proof he's not just dirty, he's a puppet master. Aisha nodded, her jaw tight, the numbers searing into her brain. 50 arrests in 2 years, all black, all framed. She added audio from the warehouse goons, their slurs tying the knot tighter. Malik uploaded it all, his excitement palpable. And by evening they were ready. The broadcast hit at 8, the newsroom buzzing as Malik took the anchor desk, his face lit by studio lights. Aisha watched from the sidelines, her arms crossed, her pulse pounding. Tonight, Malik began, his voice cutting through the feed. Explosive evidence reveals Officer Travis Boone's ties to the White Dawn, a supremacist group funding corruption in Jackson's police force. The ledger flashed on screen, redacted names glaring, followed by the audio. Gonna bury those rats, one goon snarled. Boone's name dropped like a bomb. The city erupted, phones lighting up with calls, protests reigniting outside the precinct. Aisha's lips twitched. Upward, a rare smile breaking through. Boone was cornered, his filth exposed to millions. By midnight, the feds moved in, sirens wailing as agents raided Boone's precinct locker, hauling him out in cuffs. Aisha caught it live on her phone, the grainy feed showing his face twisted. With rage, Hale trailing behind, head down. She exhaled, leaning against the newsroom wall, the tension in her shoulders easing for the first time in days. Malik clapped her on the back, grinning wide. "We did it," he said, and she nodded, the weight of Nia's absence lifting slightly. She pictured her sister's face, the CPS van, and dared to hope. Maybe this would force them to return her. The news ticker confirmed Boone's arrest, the mayor scrambling to distance himself, and Aisha felt it. Victory real this time, a crack she could pry open to get her life back. But the dawn brought a knife to her throat. Aisha woke to Malik shaking her, his face pale, eyes darting. "We've got a problem," he said, shoving a tablet at her. She blinked, groggy, and read the headline. "Journalist admits evidence." Coerced, Boone released. Her stomach dropped, ice flooding her veins as she skimmed the story. Malik had gone on air at sunrise, his voice trembling as he claimed Aisha forced him to fabricate the ledger, that she'd threatened his family. "The audio?" "Doctored," he said. The feds cut Boone loose within hours, the raid dismissed as a misunderstanding. Aisha's head snapped up, her eyes boring into Malik's. "What the hell did you do?" she hissed, standing, her chair crashing back. He stammered, backing away, hands raised. "They got to me, Aisha. Boone's people. They had photos, my kid's school. I had no choice." Her fists clenched, nails biting her palms, the betrayal a physical ache in her chest. She lunged, grabbing his collar, slamming him against the wall, her voice low and lethal. "You sold me out!" Malik's eyes widened, fear flashing, but she saw it then, the lie, the cowardice. He'd been Boone's plant all along, a snake coiled in her trust. She released him, stepping back, her breath ragged as the newsroom spun. The TV blared, Boone's face back on screen, smirking at a press conference, his crew clapping him like a hero returned. Aisha stormed out, the city's humid air slapping her face as she hit the street, her mind reeling. She'd handed Malik everything, her evidence, her hope, and he'd torched it, spinning a tale that painted her as the villain. Her phone buzzed, news alerts piling up. Aisha Monroe exposed as fraud, black activist caught in lie. The headlines twisted her fight into a crime, her name trashed nationwide, a racist smear campaign in full swing. She ducked into an alley, leaning against a brick wall, the rough texture grounding her as she fought the urge to scream. Boone had flipped her win, turned her evidence into dust, and now the city saw her as the enemy, not him. She pulled her burner, texting, "Jamal, Malik's dirty." "Boone's free, need a new play." His reply was instant. "Lay low, we'll regroup." But low wasn't an option, not with Nia gone, not with Boone laughing in her face. She'd thought she'd won, thought the ledger would break him, but he'd slithered out, stronger, meaner, his grip on the system tighter than ever. Her victory was a ghost, and now she stood alone, the world against her, her resolve fraying but not snapped. Boone's bar echoed with cheers that night, his whiskey raised in a toast to her downfall. But Aisha's eyes burned with a promise. She'd bury him yet. Should Aisha have seen Malik's betrayal coming? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think she trusted too easily, and hit that like button if Boone's comeback has you boiling. Subscribe now, her next fight's brewing, and it's going to flip this story upside down. Can she claw back from this gut punch, or will Boone's next strike finish her? Stay tuned. What's he planning in the dark? The alley's shadows swallowed Aisha Monroe as she leaned against the brick wall, her breath fogging in the humid Jackson night, the sting of Malik's betrayal still raw in her chest. Her burner phone glowed faintly in her hand. Jamal's last message, "Lay low." A faint echo she couldn't heed. Boone had turned her victory to ash, her name smeared across every screen, Nia still lost to CPS, and the city's faith in her crumbling like dry earth. She shoved the phone into her pocket, her jaw tight, the rough wall scraping her shoulder as she straightened. She wasn't done, not while Boone breathed free, his laughter a taunt she couldn't unhear. Her safe house loomed a block away, a cramped refuge she'd secured after the basement raid, its anonymity her only shield. She slipped inside, the door creaking shut, the air thick with dust and the faint hum of a borrowed laptop on a rickety table. She booted it up, the screen's blue light harsh against her tired eyes, and dove back into Boone's digital underbelly. Malik had burned her evidence, but she'd kept backups, screenshots, audio snippets. a manifesto she'd pulled from a White Dawn server months ago. It was a venomous screed, Boone's handwriting all over it, calling for purging the filth. From Jackson streets, black names listed like targets. Her fingers flew, cracking his email with a backdoor she'd planted during an old op, and there it was. The manifesto sent to his crew, time-stamped days before her arrest. Her pulse quickened, a hunter's thrill cutting through the haze. This wasn't just proof. It was a weapon, raw and unfiltered, enough to bury him if she could get it out. She encrypted the file, her hands steady despite the ache in her bruised fists, and sent it to Jamal with a note. Feds need this now. White. Dawn link confirmed. His reply pinged back. Received. Agents mobilizing. Aisha leaned back, the chair groaning under her, and let out a slow breath. The FBI could move fast with this. Raids, arrests, Boone's whole network unraveling. She pictured his smug face twisting as cuffs snapped shut, and a flicker of hope sparked in her chest. She hacked a dummy account, uploading the manifesto to a public forum, tagging every news outlet in Jackson, the post spreading like wildfire before Boone's crew could scrub it. By midnight, the city buzzed, the document trending, its slurs, and threats splashed across screens, protests swelling anew outside the precinct, voices roaring, "Boone's a racist pig." The feds hit at dawn, a swarm of black SUVs storming Boone's precinct, agents in vests hauling files and cuffing his lackeys. Aisha watched it unfold on a grainy live feed, her laptop propped on the safe-house table, her lips curling into a grim smile. Boone was dragged out, his uniform rumpled, his roar muffled as they shoved him into a van. Hale followed, head bowed, his scar stark under the morning sun. The mayor's voice crackled through another shaky press conference. "Officer Boone is suspended again, pending federal review." Aisha stood, stretching her stiff limbs, the ache in her ribs a dull reminder of the CPS raid. She'd done it, cracked his empire, forced their hand. The crowd outside City Hall swelled, chanting her name now, a tide of fists and signs she could hear through the thin walls. She grinned, fierce and fleeting. Justice was close. Nia's return within reach, but Boone wasn't a man to sit still. While Aisha savored her win, he stewed in a holding cell. His suspension a slap he wouldn't take lying down. He'd slipped a burner to a loyal thug before the cuffs, whispering, "Unleash the dogs." By dusk, the safe house trembled as a mob of White Dawn goons descended, 50 strong, their boots pounding the pavement like war drums. Aisha heard them first, the shouts, the crash of bottles, and peered through the blinds, her heart lurching. They wore hoods, carried bats and bricks, their voices a venomous howl, "Get that black witch and burn her out again." She grabbed her Glock, checking the clip, her breath steady but her mind racing. Nia wasn't here, but she was. The target, and Boone had sent a lynch mob to finish her. The first brick smashed through the window, glass shattering across the floor, a jagged rain that made her duck. Flames followed, Molotovs arcing through the air, exploding against walls, the fire roaring to life with a hunger that mirrored the night her apartment burned. Aisha coughed, smoke clawing her lungs, and fired 2 warning shots out the window, the cracks sharp in the chaos. The mob didn't flinch. They surged closer, their slurs a wall of hate, bats splintering the door. She bolted for the back, kicking out a loose board she'd scoped earlier, and slipped into the alley, the heat searing her back as the safe house blazed. Her sneakers hit gravel, her legs pumping, but the mob split, half circling to cut her off, their shadows long and twisted under flickering streetlights. She darted left, ducking into a maze of backstreets, her Glock steady in her hand, the weight a lifeline. Shouts echoed behind her, boots closing in, and a bat swung from the dark, grazing her shoulder, pain flaring hot and bright. She spun, firing once, the thug dropping with a howl, clutching his leg. But more came, a tide she couldn't outrun. A brick caught her arm, blood trickling warm down her sleeve, and she stumbled, catching herself against a dumpster, its metal cold against her palm. The fire's glow lit the sky, her safe house collapsing in a roar of sparks, and she saw cop cars idling blocks away, watching, doing nothing, their lights off, a silent betrayal that twisted her gut. Aisha pushed forward, her breath ragged, her body screaming as she rounded a corner, the mob's roar fading slightly. She spotted a drainage pipe, rusted but wide, and slid inside, the damp steel slick against her skin, her Glock scraping as she crawled. The stench of rot choked her. But she held still, listening as boots thundered past, voices snarling, "Where'd she go?" and "Find that trash." Her shoulder throbbed, blood soaking her jacket, burns blistering her hands from the heat, but she gritted her teeth, waiting until the last echo died. She emerged, muddy and battered, the night swallowing her as she limped away, the safe house, a smouldering ruin behind her. Boone's voice crackled through the air then, a live feed she caught on her phone, pulled from a white dawn stream. He was out on bail, some judge's favor, and stood in a bar, his grin wide, broadcasting her location to his followers. "She's running, folks," he drawled, whiskey in hand, his crew cheering. "But she can't hide. We'll finish her." Aisha's blood ran cold, her fingers tightening around the phone, the screen's glow reflecting in her furious eyes. She'd exposed him, got him cuffed, and he'd turned it into this, a public hunt, her life the prize. The cops' inaction burned worse than her wounds, their silence a green light for his mob, a system rigged to let her bleed. She stumbled to a payphone, its glass cracked, and dialed Jamal, her voice hoarse. They torched the safe house. "Mobs, after me. Boone's live streaming it." His reply was sharp. "Get to a pickup point. We're coming." She hung up, her body screaming, but her mind was steel. She'd won a round, forced Boone's suspension again, but he'd unleashed. Hell, a racist horde that didn't care about law or cameras. Her safe house was gone, her body broken, and now she was prey, hunted through Jackson's streets. She limped into the dark, blood dripping, burns stinging, her Glock low but ready. Boone thought he'd broken her, thought this mob would end. Her, but he'd lit a fuse instead. She'd survive this, she had to, and when she did, he'd pay double. Aisha Monroe stumbled through Jackson's back streets, her body a map of pain. Blood seeping from her arm where a brick had struck, burns blistering her hands from the safe-house fire, her shoulder throbbing from a bat's glancing blow. The night was a humid shroud, the air thick with the stench of smoke and sewage from the drainage pipe she'd crawled through to escape Boone's mob. Her Glock hung heavy in her hand, its barrel scratched from the scramble, her breath ragged, but controlled as she limped toward a pickup point Jamal had texted. A gas station 5 blocks away, its neon sign a faint beacon in the dark. Her phone buzzed against her thigh, Boone's live stream still taunting her. "She can't hide," his voice a venomous thread she couldn't shake. She gritted her teeth, shoving it deeper into her pocket, her eyes scanning the shadows for white dawn stragglers. She reached the station, its lot empty save for a flickering pump, and ducked behind a rusted soda machine, the cold metal a brief relief against her burns. Headlights cut through the gloom, an unmarked SUV rolling up, and Jamal stepped out, his tall frame tense, his eyes sharp as he spotted her. "You look like hell," he said, voice low, helping her into the passenger seat. She managed a grim smirk, wincing as she buckled in. "Feel worse," she rasped, her throat raw from smoke. He didn't waste time, peeling out as she slumped back, the hum of the engine steadying her pulse. "Feds have the manifesto," he said, glancing at her. "Raided Boone's place. Found a stash of planted evidence, bags like the one he pinned. On you." Aisha's chest tightened, hope flickering through the haze. "Enough to charge him?" she asked, and Jamal nodded. "Hate crimes, corruption? He's done." The FBI field office was a sterile fortress 20 miles outside Jackson, its halls buzzing with agents as Aisha limped in, Jamal at her side. She handed over the manifesto printout, its pages creased from her grip, and briefed her team, her voice hoarse but firm. "Boone's running White Dawn ops, arrests, arsons, all targeted at black folks. This ties him to every frame-up in the E. Last 3 years. The room hummed, agents nodding, laptops clicking as they built the case. By noon she stood in a makeshift courtroom, a federal judge flown in, her burns bandaged, her arm in a sling, testifying against Boone. He sat across, from her cuffed, his glare a dagger, but she met it unflinching, detailing every email, every slur, every payment. The judge's gavel fell. Boone charged, bail denied, a victory that tasted like blood and sweat. Aisha exhaled, leaning against the wall as agents hauled Boone away, his curses echoing down the hall. Jamal clapped her shoulder, careful of her. Injuries. You got him, he said, and she nodded, her lips curling faintly. The news hit fast, feeds lighting up. Officer Boone indicted on hate crimes. Protests cheering outside the office. Her name a rallying cry again. She pictured Nia, the CPS van, and felt the weight lift. Maybe this would force them to bring her sister back. She limped to a cot in the break room, collapsing, the exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. She'd cracked his empire, turned his hate into chains, and for the first time in weeks she slept, the hum of victory drowning out Boone's taunts. But Boone wasn't finished breaking her. While Aisha rested, he sat in a holding cell, his lawyer, a slick man named Victor Pruitt, slipping him a burner through a guard he'd bribed. Pruitt had a play, one Boone had cooked up nights ago. Fake texts planted on Aisha's phone, claiming she'd orchestrated the mob attack to frame him. He'd hacked her device weeks back, a precaution after her first leak, and now it was his ace. By dawn, Pruitt stormed the courtroom, his suit crisp, his voice booming as he presented the evidence. Screenshots of Aisha texting a White Dawn thug. Hit the safe house, make it look real. The judge, a stern woman with grey streaks in her hair, frowned, peering over her glasses as Pruitt spun the lie. She staged it all, he said, pacing. A desperate black woman faking a hate crime to smear an innocent cop. Aisha woke to Jamal shaking her, his face grim. They've got something on you, he said, shoving a tablet at her. She blinked, the headlines screaming, FBI agent accused of staging mob attack. Her stomach dropped, ice flooding her. Veins as she read Pruitt's claim, the texts glaring in sharp pixels. She bolted upright, ignoring the stab of pain in her arm, her voice rising. That's not me, Jamal gripped her shoulder, steadying her. We know, but they're buying it. She stormed to the courtroom, her sling flapping, her burns itching under bandages, and faced the judge, her eyes blazing. Those are fake, she said, her voice cutting through the hum. Check the metadata. He planted them. But Pruitt smirked, producing a forensic report, forged but convincing, claiming the texts were legit. The room tilted, whispers rippling through agents and reporters as the judge's expression hardened. Boone sat smug, his cuffs glinting, his eyes locked on Aisha with a predator's glee. She's a liar, Pruitt pressed, turning to the jury, a mix of pinched faces who'd already judged her skin before her words. She incited violence to play victim, classic tactic. Aisha's fists clenched, her nails biting her palms, the sting grounding her rage. She'd exposed Boone, got him cuffed, and now he'd flipped it, painting her as the criminal, her blackness the brushstroke that sold the lie. The judge banged her gavel, voice flat. New evidence warrants review. Boone's released. Monroe's detained for perjury. Aisha's world cracked. Agents she'd worked with hesitated, then stepped forward, cuffing her wrists, the steel cold against her burns, a betrayal sharper than Boone's mob. She glared at him as they led her out, his wink a knife in her gut, his grin wide as he strutted, free. The courtroom buzzed, reporters scrambling, the feed cutting live. FBI agent arrested in stunning twist. Her victory was dust, her fight twisted into a crime, the system bending to shield Boone again. Jamal followed, his face tight, whispering, "We'll fix this." But she barely heard, her mind reeling as they shoved her into a cell, the door clanging shut with a finality that echoed in her bones. She sank onto the cot, the concrete cold. Beneath her, her arm throbbing, burns stinging as she replayed Pruitt's smirk, Boone's wink. She'd handed the feds everything, the manifesto, the proof, and they'd swallowed his lie, her race the perfect scapegoat. The cell smelled of bleach and despair, the walls closing in, but her eyes burned with defiance. Boone thought he'd won, thought this cage would break her, but he'd misjudged her again. She'd clawed out of worse, and she'd claw out of this. Nia needed her. Jackson needed her. Her resolve hardened, a blade forged in betrayal, and she whispered to the Dark, you're not done paying. Was Boone's frame-up too slick to beat? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think Aisha's been wronged by a system that's blind to truth, and smash that like button if you're raging at how he slipped free. Subscribe now. Her fight's far from over, and the next twist will leave you stunned. Can she break out of this trap, or will Boone's next blow crush her for good? Keep watching. What's lurking in her prison cell? The cell in the Mississippi women's prison was a concrete box, its walls slick with damp, the air heavy with bleach, and the sour tang of unwashed bodies. Aisha Monroe sat on a thin cot, her wrists raw from cuffs that had been snapped on too tight, her arm still in a sling from the mob attack, burns blistering her hands like angry red maps. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a relentless hum that drilled into her skull. Her ribs aching from where a cop had slammed her during the arrest. She'd been locked in solitary for hours, the judge's words, "detained for perjury," ringing in her ears. Boone's wink a ghost she couldn't shake. Her victory had been real, his hate crimes exposed, but Pruitt's fake text had flipped it, landing her here, the system's boot on her neck. The door clanged open, a guard stepping in, a stocky woman with a buzz cut and a sneer that curled her lip. "On your feet, Monroe," she barked, her voice a gravelly snap, her eyes raking over Aisha like she was filth. Aisha stood, slow and deliberate, her sling shifting, pain flaring but ignored. The guard grabbed her arm, fingers digging into the bruise from the brick, and yanked her into the hall, the steel gate slamming shut behind them. "Got special treatment for you," she said, spitting a slur under her breath. "Troublemaking." "Right." The word landing like a slap, a racist jab Aisha had heard too often. She kept her face blank, her jaw tight, letting the guard lead her to Gen Pop, the main block a roar of voices and clanging metal. The yard was a concrete pit, surrounded by razor wire glinting in the midday sun, inmates milling in clusters, their eyes sharp as they sized her up. The guard shoved her forward, her boots scuffing the ground, and Aisha caught the whispers. Her name, her story, twisted by Boone's smear campaign. "That's the cop faker," one muttered, a tall woman with tattoos snaking up her neck, her glare cold. Another, lean with a scar across her cheek, spat on the ground near Aisha's feet, snarling, "Think you're better than us?" Aisha didn't flinch, her gaze steady but her gut tightened. She was a target here, her blackness and crime a double mark. The guards watched, leaning against the fence, their smirks wide as the first blow came. A burly inmate, egged, on by Boone's reach, swung a fist catching Aisha's jaw, the crack echoing as pain bloomed hot and bright. She stumbled, her sling tearing, her arm screaming as she caught herself, blood trickling from her lip. "Accident," the guard called, laughing, her voice thick with mockery as she turned away. Another inmate kicked, her boot slamming Aisha's ribs, a sickening crunch snapping through her chest. She gasped, doubling over, the air a knife in her lungs, but she rolled, dodging a third hit, her training kicking in despite the haze. The crowd jeered, slurs raining down. "Dirty snitch," "black trash," each word a lash, Boone's hate echoing through their fists. Aisha crawled to the wall, her back against cold concrete, her breath shallow, ribs broken now, the pain a white-hot pulse. The guards did nothing, their eyes glinting with approval, Boone's influence a shadow over the yard. She spat blood, wiping her mouth with her good hand, her burn stinging as sweat mixed with open sores. She'd survived his mob, his frame-up. But this was hell, trapped, beaten, abandoned by a system she'd served. Her mind raced, searching for a way out, when a shadow loomed, a guard, the same buzz-cut woman tossing a shank at her feet. "Finish it yourself," she hissed. Another slur slipping out, her boots retreating as the inmates circled closer. Aisha grabbed the blade, tucking it into her sling, her eyes darting for an exit. She couldn't fight them all, not like this. But she could run. She waited, feigning weakness, until a scuffle broke out across the yard. Two inmates scrapping over a cigarette, guards distracted. She bolted, her ribs screaming, her legs shaky but driven by sheer will, dodging a lunging arm as she hit the fence line. She'd scoped it on entry, a weak spot, rusted links near a dumpster, and she pried them apart, the metal cutting her palms, blood slicking her grip. She squeezed through, tumbling into an outer lot, the siren wailing too late as she staggered into the trees beyond. Her burner was gone, lost in the safe-house fire, but she'd memorized Jamal's fallback, a safe drop 2 miles west. She limped. Through the woods, branches snagging her torn clothes, her ribs a vice around her lungs, every step a battle. She reached a diner, its neon buzzing faintly, and slipped inside, the waitress, a kind-eyed woman with grey curls, gasping at her. "State. You okay, honey?" she asked, but Aisha shook her head, whispering, "Phone." The woman handed her a landline, and Aisha dialed Jamal, her voice a rasp. "I'm out. Boone's crew jumped me. Need extraction." He didn't pause. "Stay put. Team's coming." While Aisha hid in the diner's back room, sipping water that stung her split lip, Jamal's squad raided Boone's home again, this time with a warrant tied to the manifesto. They found a stash, dozens of planted evidence bags, cocaine and meth, labeled with names, dates, all black targets. The news broke as Aisha waited, the TV above the counter blaring, "Boone linked to evidence tampering, rearrest ordered." She grinned, wincing as her jaw protested, the victory bitter but real. Jamal's SUV rolled up at dusk, and she climbed, in her body screaming, but her spirit lifting as he said, "He's back in cuffs." The feds had her out by nightfall, charges dropped, the judge's voice grudging on the release order. Insufficient evidence for perjury. Aisha stood outside the prison gates, the evening air cool against her burns, her ribs taped by a medic, her grin fierce as news vans swarmed. She'd escaped hell, turned Boone's prison trap into his own noose, the stash a nail in his coffin. The crowd cheered, some inmates watching from the fence, their faces shifting, respect, maybe fear. She leaned on Jamal, her legs shaky, thinking of Nia, the fight still ahead. She'd won this round, clawed free, and Boone was down again, his empire cracking. She turned to leave, the gate clanging shut behind her, the taste of freedom sharp on her tongue. But Boone's reach stretched beyond bars. As Aisha stepped toward the SUV, a shadow moved in the yard. A White Dawn loyalist, a wiry woman with dead eyes, slipping a shank from her sleeve. She'd been paid days ago, Boone's last order before his rearrest. End her. The gate buzzed open for a shift change, and she lunged, silent and swift, the blade slashing Aisha's side as she turned too late. Pain exploded, blood soaking her shirt, and she fell. Her knees hitting gravel, the world tilting as the woman fled back inside, lost in the chaos. Jamal shouted, medics rushing, but Aisha's vision blurred, her hand pressing the wound, wet and warm. Boone's crew cheered from their cells, a distant roar she barely heard, their laughter a final stab as she collapsed, bleeding out, her wind stolen by a blade in the dark. The hospital room in Jackson smelled of antiseptic and regret, its sterile white walls closing in on Aisha Monroe as she lay in a bed, her side stitched from the shank that had nearly ended her outside the prison gates. Tubes snaked from her arm, the beep of a monitor, a steady pulse against the haze of painkillers dulling her ribs ache, her burns bandaged tight across her hands. Her eyes fluttered open, the fluorescent light stinging, her breath shallow but alive. Jamal's quick hands and a medic's skill had pulled her back from the edge. She'd survived Boone's prison hit, the White Dawn thug's blade a parting gift before his rearrest, and now she rested, her body battered, but her will a live wire. Jamal sat beside her, his face etched with worry, his voice low as he updated her. "Boone's locked up, evidence stash holding. Feds are digging deeper." She nodded, wincing as the stitches pulled, her lips curling faintly. "Good," she rasped, her throat dry, the taste of victory bitter but real. The news played on a muted TV above, headlines flashing. "Boone indicted again, evidence tampering confirmed." Aisha's leak of his prison orders, smuggled out via a guard she'd bribed with her last cash, had hit the press that morning, audio of him snarling, "End her," looping on every channel. Protests swelled outside the hospital, a sea of voices chanting her name, fists raised against the humid sky. She shifted, ignoring the stab in her side, and grabbed her burner phone from Jamal, its screen cracked but glowing. She texted Carla. "Tate, the reporter who'd broken her first story. Air this wide. Boone's done." Carla's reply was instant. On it. By noon, the audio was viral, millions hearing Boone's hate, The city boiling over, the feds tightening his cell block. Screws. Aisha grinned, fierce and fleeting, her chest lightening. Nia's return felt closer, Boone's empire crumbling under her blows. She checked out by dusk, against doctor's orders, her ribs taped, her arm free of the sling, burns hidden under. Fresh gauze. Jamal drove her to a new hideout, a friend's attic across town, its slanted ceiling low but safe. She limped up the stairs, her side throbbing, and sank onto a mattress, the news still buzzing on her phone. Boone denied bail. Protests intensify. She stood by the window, peering through a crack in the blinds. The crowds roar a distant thunder, their signs sharp with anger. Justice now! She'd hobbled out of surgery, leaked his orders, and turned his hit into his noose. Hero. Status reclaimed, the city hers again. She leaned against the wall, her breath steady, thinking it might be over. Boone finally buried under his own hate. But Boone's venom ran deeper than bars. While Aisha rested, he'd cashed his last favor. A White Dawn leader named Silas Crow, a hulking man with a shaved head and a swastika tattooed on his neck. Released on a technicality days prior, Silas rallied the mob Boone had primed, 50 strong, their rage a furnace stoked by her leaks. They struck at midnight, a coordinated snatch as Aisha stepped onto the attic porch for air, her Glock holstered, her guard down. Tires screeched, a van swerving up, and 4 hooded figures leapt out, bats swinging, their slurs a guttural roar. "Time's up, Black Snake!" She drew her gun, firing once, the shot clipping a thug's shoulder. But a bat cracked her wrist, the Glock clattering away as pain exploded, white-hot and blinding. They dragged her into the van, her kicks landing hard but useless, her side tearing open, blood soaking her shirt anew. The drive was a blur, her head spinning. The mob's laughter a sick chorus as they bound her wrists with zip ties, cutting into her burns, her ribs screaming with every jolt. They dumped her in Jackson's town square, a moonlit sprawl of cracked pavement and old oaks, the van peeling off as 50 White Dawn goons circled, their hoods off now, faces twisted with hate. Silas stepped forward, his boots loud, a camcorder in hand, live streaming to Boone's followers. "This is justice," he growled, his voice booming, "for race treason." The crowd cheered, bats raised, slurs flying. "Filthy traitor," and "End her kind," each word a lash, Boone's ideology in flesh and blood. Aisha knelt, bound, her wrist throbbing, blood dripping from her reopened wound, her burns raw under the ties. Silas aimed a pistol at her head, its barrel cold against her temple, the click of the hammer loud in the night. "Any last words?" he sneered, his breath sour with beer, the camera's red light blinking as thousands watched. She spat blood, her eyes locking on his, her voice steady despite the pain. "You're all dead men," she said, low and lethal, a promise, not a plea. The crowd roared, some laughing, others howling, but Silas hesitated, his finger twitching, her defiance a splinter in his hate. She saw it then, her chance. The zip ties were tight, but her training kicked in, her good hand twisting, loosening the knot just enough. She waited, Silas ranting to the camera. "She framed our brother Boone," and lunged as he turned, her legs sweeping his, knocking him down with a thud. The gun skittered, and she rolled, snapping the ties free, her wrist screaming as she grabbed the pistol, firing twice into the air. The mob froze, stunned, and she bolted, her side bleeding. Her ribs a vice dodging a bat swing as she hit the oaks, their branches a shield. Sirens wailed, faint but closing. Jamal's team, alerted by her last text before the snatch, checked the square. FBI choppers roared overhead, blades cutting the night, spotlights blinding the mob as agents dropped, rifles drawn. Aisha stumbled, her vision blurring but kept moving, the gun steady in her hand as shots rang out. White Dawn scattering, she reached Silas, sprawled and cursing, and kicked the camcorder away, its feed cutting as she aimed at his chest. "Tell Boone it's over," she hissed, her finger tight on the trigger, but an agent pulled her back, cuffing Silas instead. She collapsed, blood pooling, the crowd's cheers turning to screams as feds swarmed. Boone's live-stream dream, a nightmare. She'd broken free, turned their execution into her stand. The choppers a lifeline she'd earned. Agents lifted her, medics rushing, her pulse fading but her grin intact. She'd won again, Boone's mob crushed live for the world to see. But as they loaded her into an ambulance, Boone watched from his cell, out on bail hours prior, a judge's wink setting him loose. He stood in the square's chaos unnoticed, his own gun drawn, aiming at her stretcher, his finger on the trigger, a final shot to end her as the cameras rolled. Did Aisha deserve this public hell? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think she's a hero for fighting back, and hit that like button if Boone's mob has you seething. Subscribe now, her next battle's coming and it's gonna flip everything you've seen. Can she dodge Boone's bullet, or will his hate finally claim her? Stay locked in, what's hiding in the square's shadows? The town square in Jackson was a battlefield under the moonlit sky, its cracked pavement slick with Aisha Monroe's blood as she lay slumped against an oak, her side torn open from the shank, her wrist throbbing from snapping the zip ties. The air buzzed with chaos, FBI choppers thumping overhead, their spotlights slicing through the night, white dawn goons scattering as agents fired warning shots, their boots pounding the earth. Aisha gripped Silas Crow's pistol, her burns screaming. Under the gauze, her ribs a jagged ache with every breath, but her eyes burned with defiance. She'd broken free from Boone's staged execution, turned his mob's live stream into her rebellion, and now the feds swarmed, cuffing Silas as he spat curses, his camcorder shattered on the ground. Her vision blurred, blood loss tugging her, under, but she held steady, the gun a lifeline in her trembling hand. Jamal sprinted through the fray, his voice cutting through the din as he reached her, kneeling, his hands pressing her wound. "Stay with me, Aisha," he said, his tone sharp, urgent, blood seeping through his fingers. She nodded, her lips parting in a faint smirk, rasping, "Got 'em good." Agents hauled Silas away, his roars fading, the mob's hate dissolving under federal boots. A medic slid in, tearing open a kit, stitching her side with quick, practiced hands, the needle's sting a distant echo against her resolve. She'd outmaneuvered Boone's dogs, turned their broadcast into his doom, and the chopper's roar was her victory hymn. Nia's face flashed in her mind, a beacon pulling her through the dark. But Boone wasn't in a cell. He stood 50 yards off, freed on bail hours ago by a crooked judge, his silhouette blending with the chaos, a predator in plain sight. His gun gleamed in his hand, aimed at Aisha's stretcher as medics lifted her, his finger tightening, a final shot to bury her live on every screen. She saw him too late, her Glock slipping as pain flared, but instinct kicked in. She rolled off the stretcher, hitting the ground hard, her stitches ripping, blood pooling anew. The shot cracked, grazing her shoulder, a hot line of fire that made her gasp, the bullet embedding in the oak behind her. Jamal spun, drawing his sidearm, firing back, but Boone ducked into the crowd, his grin a slash of white as he vanished, agents shouting, choppers pivoting to track him. Aisha scrambled up, her good hand snatching her Glock, her side screaming as she staggered forward, Jamal at her flank. "He's here!" she hissed, her voice raw, scanning the shadows. The square pulsed with panic, protesters fleeing, feds tightening their net. But Boone was a ghost, his plan unfolding. She felt it, a trap coiled tight. She spotted him again, ducking behind a statue, and charged, her legs shaky but driven, her gun raised. "Boone!" she shouted, her voice a blade, and he turned, his eyes glinting, his pistol swinging up. They fired simultaneously, her shot clipping his arm, his grazing her thigh, both stumbling. Blood splattering the pavement like ink. She lunged, tackling him, her ribs cracking anew, pain, a white-hot scream as they hit the ground. Her Glock pressed to his chest. "You're done," she snarled, her finger tight on the trigger, his breath hot with whiskey and hate. He laughed, a guttural sound, his arm bleeding but his grin unyielding. "Checkmate," he rasped, and she froze, his words a splinter in her fury. Jamal grabbed her, pulling her off, agents swarming Boone, cuffs snapping shut as he kept laughing. His eyes locked on hers, a promise she couldn't read. She stood, swaying, her gun lowering, the square a blur of lights and shouts. Silas cuffed. Boone down, the mob crushed. She'd won, turned his execution into his arrest, live for the world to see. The feds dragged Boone to a van, his laughter echoing, and Aisha limped to Jamal, her shoulder dripping, her thigh a throbbing mess. He's got something, she muttered, her mind racing, the victory hollow against his glee. Jamal nodded, his face grim, barking orders to secure the square. She pulled her burner, texting Carla. Boone's confession. Air it now. The live stream had caught it all. Her tackle, his words, a raw clip spreading as she stood there. Blood-soaked but unbroken. Protesters cheered, a tide of fists and voices, her name a war cry against the night. She leaned on an agent, her breath ragged, thinking of Nia, the fight she'd waged. Boone was in cuffs, his empire dust, and she'd done it live, undeniable. But then she saw it, a glint under the statue, a black box wired with blinking lights tucked where Boone had fallen. Her gut dropped, her eyes snapping to his grin as agents hauled him away, his laugh a siren in her skull. Jamal, she shouted, pointing, her voice cutting through the chaos. He spun, spotting it, and yelled, "Bomb!" The square erupted, agents shoving protesters back, Aisha staggering toward it, her injuries a chorus of agony. She dropped to her knees, the timer glaring, 10 seconds, red digits ticking down, Boone's last play rigged to blow if he lost. Her hands shook, blood slicking her fingers, burns splitting as she fumbled the wires, her training a lifeline against the panic. 9 seconds. She yanked her burner, snapping a photo, texting Jamal. "Red or blue?" He shouted back, "Red!" 8 seconds. She gripped the red wire, her vision swimming, Boone's laugh fading as the van peeled off. 7 seconds. She pulled, the timer freezing at 6, her breath a sob as the box clicked, inert, the square holding its breath. She collapsed gravel, biting her knees, her side gushing, the crowd's roar a distant wave as medics rushed her again. Jamal's voice a tether. "You did it." She'd diffused it, saved hundreds, turned Boone's final trap into her stand, but her body gave out, darkness tugging as agents lifted her, her Glock clattering to the ground. Boone's van rolled away, his grin fixed, the feds oblivious to his deeper game. She'd stopped the bomb, but his hate lingered, a seed she couldn't see. Aisha's stretcher rocked, her eyes fluttering, the square a blur of lights and cheers, her victory a fragile thread. She'd broken free, disarmed him, live-streamed his end, but his laughter haunted her, a promise of more. Her hand gripped, Jamal's, weak but fierce, her voice a whisper. "Find Nia." She'd won this war, Boone in cuffs, the bomb dead. But the cost was carved into her flesh, her resolve a flame flickering against the dark as medics raced her away, the square, trembling with her name. The ruins of Jackson's town square smoked under a grey dawn, the air thick with ash and the tang of blood as Aisha Monroe lay on a stretcher, her body a tapestry of wounds, stitches torn from her side, a grazed shoulder, a throbbing thigh, burns splitting under gauze. Medics swarmed, their voices a blur as they lifted her into an ambulance, the wail of sirens cutting through the chaos she'd left behind. She'd defused Boone's bomb with 6 seconds to spare, her blood slick, hands yanking the red wire, saving hundreds as the crowd roared her name. A hero forged in fire and hate, Travis Boone was cuffed, dragged off in a van, his grin a fading taunt, his empire of White Dawn goons shattered by FBI boots. Her eyes fluttered, pain pulling her under, but she gripped Jamal's hand, her whisper fierce. "Find Nia." She'd won, broken him live for the world, but the cost was etched in her flesh, her resolve a flickering flame. The ambulance raced through Jackson's streets, its lights flashing against shattered storefronts, the city a war zone of protests and wreckage. Jamal rode beside her, his face tight, barking orders into a radio as medics stabilized her, their hands swift with IVs and bandages. She faded in and out, Boone's laughter a ghost in her skull, his bomb a final claw she'd ripped free. The hospital loomed, a squat brick fortress, and they wheeled her in, the sterile halls a stark contrast to the square's grit. Doctors stitched her anew, her side a patchwork of thread, her thigh wrapped tight, burns slathered with ointment that stung like acid. She slept fitfully, the beep of machines a lifeline, Nia's face haunting her dreams, braids swinging, eyes wide, CPS dragging her away. She'd ended Boone, but her sister was still lost, A wound deeper than any blade. Weeks bled into months. Aisha healing in a federal safe house, a nondescript cabin 30 miles north, its pine walls a quiet refuge. Her ribs mended, her burns faded to scars, her wrist regaining strength as she gripped a cane, pacing the creaking floor. Jamal visited daily, his updates a lifeline. Boone's trial loomed, the evidence stash, manifesto, and prison orders stacking high, the feds building an airtight case. Nia was traced to a foster home, CPS stonewalling, but Jamal swore he'd get her back. Aisha nodded, her jaw tight, the canes tap a rhythm to her plotting. She'd testify, bury Boone for good, ND. This war she'd fought with blood and cunning. The news buzzed, her name a legend. Aisha Monroe, hero who stopped Boone's bomb. She smirked, bitter but proud, her victory a beacon for Jackson's battered soul. The trial came on a crisp March morning, the federal courthouse a marble, monolith buzzing with energy, reporters crowding the steps, their cameras flashing like gunfire. Aisha limped in, her cane steady, her scars hidden under a crisp blazer, her eyes sharp as she faced the packed room. Boone sat at the defense table, his uniform swapped for a suit, his grin gone but his glare a dagger, cuffs glinting on his wrists. The jury watched, a mix of stern faces, mostly white, their eyes flickering over her, some with awe, others with doubt, her blackness a silent question in their stares. Judge Evelyn Hart presided, her grey hair pulled tight, her voice a hammer as she called order, the gavel's crack silencing the hum. Aisha took the stand, her cane propped beside her, her breath steady as she swore the oath, her gaze locking on Boone. The prosecutor, a wiry man named Daniel Klein, paced, his questions sharp. "Ms. Monroe, what's your role in this case?" She leaned forward, her voice clear, cutting through the room's tension. "I'm FBI Director Aisha Monroe," she said, pausing as gasps rippled, Boone's jaw dropping, his eyes widening in shock. "I've been undercover 3 years, dismantling Boone's network. White Dawn, fake arrests, arsons, all targeting black lives." The courtroom erupted, shouts and whispers colliding, Judge Hart pounding for silence, her gavel a thunderclap. As Aisha held Boone's stare, her smirk faint but lethal, Klein handed her files, manifesto, stash logs, audio. And she laid it out, her testimony a blade, Boone's payments to supremacists, his orders to frame her, the bomb his final gambit. "I posed as a civilian," she said, "to expose him from the inside. Every hit, the arrest, the fire, Nia's kidnapping, was his retaliation." The jury shifted, some nodding, others frozen, the weight of her title sinking in. Boone's lawyer, Victor Pruitt, leapt up, his face red, shouting, "Objection! Why hide her role?" Aisha cut in, her voice steel. "To see how far he'd go, how deep the rot ran." Pruitt faltered, the judge overruling, and Boone slumped, his cuffs clinking, panic flickering in his eyes as cops in the gallery flinched, their complicity exposed. The room spun, reporters typing furiously, the revelation a bomb of its own, FBI director undercover, nearly killed to break a racist empire. Klein pressed, "Did Boone know?" Aisha shook her head. "Not till now. He thought I was just another black woman to crush." The jury's eyes hardened, some leaning forward, the truth a sledgehammer. She played the prison audio, "End her," her voice steady as Boone's snarl filled the air, his hate laid bare. Pruitt floundered, his cross-examination weak, stammering about entrapment, but Aisha dismantled him, her scars a silent witness. "He burned my home, took my sister, tried to bomb a square. That's not entrapment, that's terror." The verdict came fast. The jury's guilty, a chorus that shook the walls. Hate crimes, corruption, attempted murder, life without parole. Boone roared, lunging as agents dragged him out. His curses drowned by cheers, the gallery erupting. Aisha's name a chant. She stood, her cane steady, her eyes on his retreating back, a weight lifting. Nia would come home. Jackson might heal. She limped out. The steps swarmed with cameras, her blazer crisp, her badge gleaming as she faced them. The hero they doubted, now undeniable. Jamal met her, grinning. "You did it," and she nodded, her voice soft. "For Nia." But the war wasn't over. As Aisha stepped into the sunlight, a crack split the air. A sniper's bullet grazing her arm, a hot sting that spun her, blood blooming on her sleeve. She dropped, Jamal tackling her behind a pillar, screams erupting as reporters dove. The shot echoing off marble. A voice whispered through the chaos, low and close, a white dawn remnant in the crowd. "This ain't over." Aisha's eyes snapped up, her hand pressing the wound, her badge glinting as she scanned the faces. Boone's second in command, a shadow she'd missed, his grin a mirror of his boss's, vanishing into the panic. She smirked, pain sharpening. Her resolve, her voice a growl to Jamal, "Find him." The ambulance came again, medics rushing, but Aisha waved them off, standing, her arm dripping, her cane a crutch as she faced the cameras, unflinching. Boone was down, his empire dust, but his hate had roots she hadn't cut, a new enemy rising from his ashes. She'd revealed her truth, FBI director, 3 years in the dark, and won, live for the world. But the bullet was a warning, a thread, left dangling. Her scars ached, her blood stained the steps, but her eyes burned, ready for war. She'd broken one beast, and now another waited, her fight unending, her badge a shield and a target as she limped into the fray. Naya's freedom. Her fire, Jackson's future, her stake. Aisha Monroe's journey teaches us resilience against systemic injustice. Her battle with Travis Boone and his racist network reveals that courage can topple even the most entrenched corruption, but it comes at a cost, scars, loss, and an unending fight. Her undercover role as FBI director underscores the power of strategy and sacrifice, showing that one person's defiance can spark a movement, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Yet the story warns us that victory is rarely final. Boone's defeat births a new threat, a reminder that racism's roots run deep, requiring constant vigilance. Aisha's refusal to break, despite fires, mobs, and betrayal, highlights the strength found in purpose, here saving her sister Nia and protecting Jackson. It's a lesson in standing firm when the system bends against you, in using intellect over despair, and in recognizing that justice demands more than one win. It's a war of attrition. The twist ending drives home a brutal truth. Evil adapts. And heroes must too. Aisha's story isn't just about triumph. It's about the grind of resistance, the toll of being a target, and the hope that fuels the next battle. What's the takeaway? Fight smart, fight hard, and never assume the enemy's gone, because hate doesn't die easy. So what do you think? Can one person really change a racist system? Or is Aisha's fight a spark in a storm? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if her grit inspires you, and subscribe for more tales of justice. Share this if you stand against corruption. Thanks for joining this ride, and here's to courage in the face of darkness.